This week, we welcome Drew Cohen, Chief Executive Officer at Masterpiece Solutions, to discuss cybersecurity challenges in a teleworking world. In the leadership and communication sections, we're going to focus on one survey and its results. I think it's going to be a really interesting discussion. It's called Marketing and Selling to the CISO. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Most breaches are caused by exploiting oversights in basic cybersecurity fundamentals, but complex hybrid multi-cloud infrastructures make cybersecurity hygiene challenging. Red Seal can help. It shows you what's on your network, how it's connected, and the associated risk across public cloud, private cloud, and physical environments. With Red Seal, you'll get control of your cybersecurity fundamentals so you can protect your organization from the inevitable attack vectors and reduce your cyber risk. For more information, visit securityweekly.com/Red Seal.
Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 182, recorded July 27th, 2020. I am your host, Matt Alderman, here in Colorado. Joining me from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, which is where I will be next week, finally, is my co-host, Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Thanks, Matt. Good to be here.
I can't wait to get back to studio next week for Virtual Hacker Summer Camp. We're going to have a good week. Fun. Also, join us on the lines, my second co-host. We've missed him the last 2 weeks, Mr. Jason Albuquerque.
It's great to be back. I had a little bit of PTO scheduled and then some, obviously some work endeavors. So I am so happy to be back.
Glad to have you back. The second segment is geared to you. I want your feedback on this whole survey. I thought it was very interesting results. So look forward to it. Do you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover on any of our shows? Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guest and completing the form. We review them monthly and we'll reach out to you once reviewed. Also, next week is Black Hat. Security Weekly is an official media partner for Virtual Black Hat 2020. You can register and save $200 by going to securityweekly.com/summercamp 2020. Click the register button, use our discount code. It's on the website. It's 20SecWeekBH. Also, we will be doing our Virtual Hacker Summer Camp next week, all week, Monday through Thursday. It's days filled with micro interviews. We're doing each of our enterprise shows in the morning or in the evening. We're live streaming them out. So please check out any pricing options. We'll get the schedule up there later this week on who's coming on. It's at the same website, securityweekly.com/summercamp 2020. All right. Our guest for this segment, Drew Cohen, is a leader, entrepreneur, engineer, and innovator whose career spans across areas directly relevant to multiple facets of Masterpiece's business model. We'll talk about that in a second. Drew has experience in Silicon Valley as a CEO and CTO, building venture-backed technology companies, has deep experience leading technology efforts in support of the intelligence community. He's an engineer by both training and desire with a deep passion for technology and innovation. Drew, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to start first with Masterpiece Solutions, Peace as in P-E-A-C-E, not P-I-E-C-E. Give us a little background on Masterpiece and kind of the role there and what you're doing with Masterpiece Solutions.
Sure. So Masterpiece has the kind of anchor business that we're in is providing technology services to government clients in the Columbia, Maryland area. And we do that. It's really like a lot of the other companies in our space, all about the right talent. Right? And we focus exclusively on technology talent. We're typically a subcontractor in the government contracting parlance. So we don't try to prime contracts and we don't spend a lot of time on BD. We rather spend time on trying to find the best people and recruiting them in and give them a place they really want to be. And then the second part of what we do is then offer them an opportunity to innovate and start new technology businesses. Most of them are in the cybersecurity space, but they're not all cybersecurity businesses. So we think we're a little bit of kind of the Bay Area in Columbia, Maryland.
Well, we know Columbia very well from our days back at Tenable.
Very well.
Very well. I've been stayed at a lot of the local hotels in the area.
Well, even more so. We used to do the CCDC. Mid-Atlantic was in Columbia, Maryland. So even I think before I was at Tenable, I was traveling there for that. So I spent a lot of time in that area.
Yeah. So we know there's great tech there. There's also, I think, a great investment hub there, personally. I mean, Ron's been doing a lot of work in the area. You have the Data Tribe folks down in Fulton, Maryland, bringing a lot of people out of the fort. So I think you see a lot of great tech coming out of the Columbia area. So I would agree with you, Drew, kind of the East Coast equivalent to what's going on in the Valley. What was interesting when we were doing our prep call is we were talking a little bit about some of the government contracting, some of the slowdowns with the pandemic, and you actually started to highlight some very interesting challenges that you were starting to see with the teleworking environment, the work from home, which a lot of organizations are facing. So let's talk through some of those macro level trends that you're seeing in your business and also what you're seeing for your clients.
Sure. So we are seeing, like everyone, we're all online right now. We're all teleworking. I'm downstairs in a converted office so that my wife and kids can run around the house and I'm quiet during this call. But what I've noticed, and probably most of you have noticed if you put a scanner on your network, is these days your homes are full of IoT devices, all kinds of stuff that you didn't expect on the network. And all of those represent network security challenges. And the question is, what do companies, government agencies do when all of a sudden all their staff are at home and the environments they are in have a lot more risk exposure and don't have the kind of managed networks that you do inside a company? And in fact, today I'm running a product from one of our startups called the Ikes. And so my home router, I replaced with the Yikes router, and it's doing some amazing stuff. So hopefully the performance looks pretty good on the on this call. But I can run a network scanning tool on my computer, and I only see my computer and the printer, and all the other devices on the home network, and I've got about 50 of them, are all invisible. And because they're on separate little micronets. So, that kind of new technology and the deployment of that in these kind of environments is pretty neat. And we've got a number of startups that are doing interesting things to secure teleworking or to make remote working just safer and more trusted.
Now, Paul, we know that as soon as your son gets a Windows machine, it gets infected. And we know that, the extension of working from home and the enterprise network security is a challenge. And one of the things Drew and I was talking about is, he goes, think about the opportunity to segment your network at home pretty easily and isolate it from each other, which is a big challenge I think a lot of organizations are facing right now with people at home with personal and work stuff going on the exact same network.
Either you really got to know what you're doing or have a really great solution, which is hard because everyone's home network is slightly different. The other thing is it's not an enterprise network either, right? Like it is very, very fragile, I'm finding. You start segmenting and all of a sudden I can't turn my lights on and off anymore, right? Because I had that configured and my Sonos system doesn't work anymore, right? A lot of it does rely on broadcast, multicast traffic being on the same network because that's what the solutions expect. They don't expect a nicely segmented network and those security controls to be in place.
Yeah, and let's not forget, we're running into situations where the necessity of convergence between the home network and the corporate network are coming into play. We ran into some issues with simply people wanting to be able to print from their home printer because they didn't, it wasn't a corporate printer. And, we had to work with them on making concessions for those type of things. So it's, there's going to be a level of convergence because folks are going to have, in order for the business to stay running and people to be able to do their jobs effectively from home, they're going to have to use some of their resources within their home.
I
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
question why people need to print stuff anymore.
I do too, believe me. I do too.
Now, we're going to talk about digital signing in a second, but there are times I actually have to use that darn printer to print out a piece of paper to put my signature on it. Occasionally, not
occasionally.
not
No, I
very
agree,
often.
Matt. Yeah, it's occasional.
It's occasional. And Drew, I think you saw some very interesting network performance enhancements, cutting down what Paul was talking about. Some of that unicast, multicast stuff that's going on your network that you don't even know it exists.
We did. It was kind of funny because I ran into the Sonos problem. Right, we got a little pool in the backyard, and my daughter was trying to use it, and she had the Sonos out there, and she was playing it from her iPhone, and the Apple TV could broadcast over AirPlay too. And there are these broadcast protocols. What we found is when we started to limit which devices can connect to which, the network traffic really went down. So while we paid some overhead for the software-defined networking virtualization, putting a little mini network around every device, we gained efficiencies because a lot of the extraneous packets were just not going anywhere. And that was unexpected. And so it's pretty interesting. One of the bad news is you can't put an interesting network monitor now on the network because it can only see the things it's supposed to, and it's on its isolated network. But yeah, the point you made earlier, I think, Paul, about the homes being these flat networks with a lot of broadcast traffic, I think it's really interesting what the profiles of home networking is, and what that means as you try to lock it down. But I've been living with that, and I can tell you that I've been running this for a couple of weeks at home, and now's not the time you want to kill your home network, because it doesn't help the family.
Yeah, I agree. Outages at my home are now more stressful than an outage would be here at work, or equally as stressful, right? Especially when school's in session and they're doing the schooling from home, because then it's like, they have to log on at a certain time and be on a Zoom call or whatever with a teacher. So
yeah, and it was kind of interesting you mentioned signing. If you think about it, securing the home network, enabling signing to happen more securely, all the things you do remotely, bringing remote office type functions into the home at a distance. There's ways to rethink all of those. And so I think we're seeing a lot of change in all those aspects of how to do business. And I think that as things start back up, the hybrid, how much of that stays and how much of that returns to normal, I think that's still a big open question.
Yeah, I mean, we've been using digital signing technologies in our business for a while. We use Panda Docs, but you've got the other offerings out there as well. And we use them for a lot of our contracts back and forth. And so it creates a convenience, but it also means that if somebody hacks into your email account or something, potentially gets access to being able to sign these documents now. So it does have a business workflow potential impact here that has to be accounted for when people are no longer in the office physically signing documents, because it could open up some different threat vectors remotely.
Yeah, so one of the guys one of the teams we have working started doing digital signatures using a phone app, using that as kind of a second factor, and they're getting some pretty interesting traction. And I've been using that for all our company documents lately, and that's working pretty well. I've learned more about digital signing and signing clouds than I ever wanted to know. It's interesting. Europe seems to be a little bit more advanced in terms of what they legally expect and allow than the US. So I'm interested in kind of what happens here, and how much of the Europe digital signing laws become a model for us. And as you said, what are the vulnerabilities for server-oriented digital signing?
Yeah. The other area we want to cover a little bit was industrial IoT in a remote world. If we think about buildings, building management, plants, et cetera, in a remote work scenario, what does that do to monitoring some of these plants, some of these industrial control system environments, some of these other building systems that need physical humans there? What are you seeing on that front?
So we have one company that's working with a large metro system to secure their faring and fare card collection and to modernize what the conductors use for getting people on and off trains and in and out of parking lots and all that kind of stuff. And what we found that's interesting, there's not as much teleworking focus there, but it turned out to be a much better time to deploy because they had a very, prior to this whole COVID thing, it turns out that if you were running a major metro in a major metropolitan area, that between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m., you did not want your fare cards offline because that was when you got all your revenue. And with a lower ridership, that's more focused. It's still important ridership because a lot of healthcare workers still are going in and essential workers are using the metro in cities, but they've been able to deploy new technology faster because they've got more flexibility in when they can deploy. They don't have to work around rush hours to the same degree they had to before.
So are you seeing new security improvements and technology improvements now in some of these systems? Because I know some of these systems have been a little behind when it came to better securing these environments. This gives them a window now to actually get these environments better secured?
Yeah, and I think that the security products themselves are helpful in bootstrapping. So that the one thing that we're seeing, and one thing that that particular company has been working on is how can you apply modern security practice to legacy systems. At the end of the day, the industrial controls, industrial IoT, whatever you want to call it, there's a big install base. And you can't say it only gets secure when you replace all the devices. So you have to think about ways to add strong security without re-architecting the whole system. So I think we're seeing solutions that do that a lot better than they used to.
Yeah, and I think we'd see some of the same trends in maybe office buildings now that there's not a lot of people there. A bunch of upgrades going into some of these office buildings as well, or no?
Yeah, so that same company, Zool, is working with a large real estate investment trust. They have 150-something offices, buildings in multiple states, and we've been helping kind of identify and lock down their office equipment. Not office equipment, but HVAC systems. The thing that we found that was a larger concern that I wouldn't have never expected is the power management systems that control all the building automation, which when you think about it makes sense. If you take down the power, you can take down the building. So, those kind of things were typically running in the clear, and now they're getting some attention. And the ability to do some of that remotely is getting interesting.
Yeah.
And kind of taking the network monitoring and the security pieces and bringing them together, right? So, you want to know what's going on, so you need network monitoring, but you also want to make it hard to break in and do damage. And so how do you let one side inform the other side and vice versa in a continuous basis? And I think that's one of the things where we've seen a lot of progress. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think those systems are much more common today than they were, 15 years ago. When I was at the university, though, we had such systems because there were facilities that, for research purposes, actually had live animals. Now, putting aside whether you agree with live animal testing or not, or what types of research they were, some of it was kind of like classified, but whatever. The case was that there's live animals in the building. Those buildings had automation systems and but we didn't call it IoT back then, but had IoT that was extremely important, right? Number one, for integrity and uptime, right? Because if the building got too hot or too cold, the animals could suffer the consequences, right? And we had to, I was brought on the conversation because they're like, what if someone were to break in and mess with the temperature controls in the building, right? And those are still very much a concern today, as well as the remote access. Now we bring in the fact that we can't be physically located in a building because we're under a quarantine order in today's world, right? And now how do we adjust and monitor those temperature sensors? One of the interesting stories is you go over to Israel and you look at their water management systems. Now, it turned out to not be an incident, but they had 4G connectivity to the sensors that had access to the PLCs that were controlling the water facility. Now, fortunately, it was a small, facility, and not many people were impacted by what was obviously the Iranian. I mean, I'm not going to say with 100% certainty, right? But it was Iranians that were breaking into these systems and messing with the water systems in Israel, and it was because not the PLCs. But from what I read, the access devices, right, that were 4G on the internet were the ones that were vulnerable. So you have to make sure that obviously we cover all of our bases within all these systems.
Yeah, and the thing that we've seen is the networks that are managing these systems end up with more kind of traditional IT things on them as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there's OT and IT devices both on the same network, and they have very different profiles. And the IT stuff likes to reach out to the internet, and even with good firewalls, there's traffic, north-south traffic to and from the internet that's fairly non-deterministic. You don't know where they're going to go, and often there's other systems in between, right? Akamai, content staging, and other things. So when you look at where the traffic's going, it's complex, domain name servers and all that kind of stuff. Whereas on the OT side, it's much more deterministic, but if they're running on, but it's more broadcast traffic, things like BACnet and whatnot. And when all that's on the same network and you start looking across it, it gets harder to tell what's supposed to be there and what's not supposed to be there. And segmenting the OT view from the IT view, that by itself is a pretty interesting problem. I think we've seen some really good progress made at that. And so I was just looking at a dashboard the other day that actually categorized the IT traffic and the OT traffic and devices and let you see the difference, and then really help you kind of zero in and make sure the OT stuff was functioning as it should and not interacting with things on the internet that it shouldn't. And that was a pretty cool display. So I was,
or functioning as designed within the network, right? That was when I read the book about Stuxnet from Kim Zetter, right? That was one of the things I was like, oh, we've applied that technique for years, looking at the traffic profile and then going, when it's updating firmware this time, it's a lot larger in size and a lot more packets than it usually sends, and that's because attackers had implanted extra things inside the firmware, and that was one of the ways that they were able to discover that someone was tampering with those devices.
Yeah, so the interesting thing is by having a bunch of people that work for, government agencies that think a little bit out of the box on some of that, it does help the productization side be cognizant of the fact that not everyone's trying to use devices and networking as intended. On the other hand, you see some of that stuff on the public internet more so than you do in government spaces. So being able to go back and forth between the two environments turns out to be pretty powerful. And that's one area where the commercial startups we have and the government clients that we have kind of benefit by Masterpiece people having kind of a foot in each camp, if you will, as they mature some of these technologies.
Agreed.
Now, Paul brought up 4G, but you want to talk a little bit about 5G, because think about the scenario Paul just laid out with the 4G access. Now we move to 5G. 5G is going to have some very interesting impacts, I think, on all of us as it starts to roll out. You had some insights there as well, Drew.
Yeah, so the thing I mentioned earlier, one of the startups we have is doing software-defined networking and micro-segmentation in the house. And that's basically the stuff I'm running right now is putting a little mini network. Every device in my home network is on its own virtual network. And what's really going on under the hood is kind of the networking equivalent of virtual machines. Instead of it being servers, it's networks. And so the moment you think about every device having its own network and managing a collection of individual networks, now you go, where is the physical network? Does it matter as much? And the answer is not necessarily as much. And then the question is, okay, what does that mean if you have an environment where there's 5G and some of your stuff is running on a public commoditized network? Some of the stuff is running maybe in an office that's a more controlled, multi-segmented network, and some of it's running at your employees' houses. And can you kind of think about all the enterprise devices across those three networking spaces as one network, one virtual network, as opposed to thinking about it as managing the physical infrastructure, the physical networking infrastructure it's on. And so that, I think, is kind of where things might be going. We're a long way from getting there, but if that happens, that could really be an enabler for 5G to replace the physical networking infrastructure in much the same way that cloud computing replaced the physical server infrastructure.
Yeah,
it might
another
change where you
layer.
get your networks from.
Yeah, I mean, it's just abstracting away that network even one more layer than the cloud providers have already done it. Now you're doing it through a 5G network. Where's your physical devices now, right? In how do
Right.
I monitor that network versus what I was doing on the enterprise side?
Yeah, it abstracts away the cabling, right? As we've abstracted away the data center, but we haven't abstracted away the network cabling or the airwaves in your own Wi-Fi. And if you can abstract them to, kind of a 5G world where you have persistent, over the air network connectivity for everything, it's a brave new world.
Yeah, definitely. Jason, Paul, any additional questions while we've got Drew here?
From my perspective, I really wanted to get a little bit of insight on this call about where we're heading. And I've seen this on, from Cisco's perspective and reading on the OT side of the aisle and the IoT side of the aisle. How much traction are we making with manufacturer usage description, the MUD specifications at 8520? I mean, I've read a lot of articles on it. I know Cisco has a whole program on it. But for me, it's really what's the reality and how far out are we from that becoming real time for us?
So, we participated in some work with Cisco and with NIST on getting the MUD spec adopted. The next real phase of that is getting manufacturers to incorporate it into the devices. But I think what's happening, and kind of one of the interesting pieces, is that there's more potential use cases for that spec while the devices are getting. The end game is to have every device have MUD-enabled profiling. So as you put the device online, you could know a little bit more about what that device is supposed to do and use that to automatically configure some of the network security around the device. But in the meantime, there's libraries of MUD files that could help you figure that out and figure out what to do with devices even before the individual devices are all MUD enabled. And so that may really help bootstrap MUD capabilities and create solve the chicken and egg problem, because no one wants MUD enabled networking if there's no MUD enabled devices, and no one wants to make MUD enabled devices unless there's MUD enabled networking. And so the question is, how do you kind of overcome the chicken and egg? And so these kind of incremental near-term uses might be the thing that really helps move MUD forward.
Yeah, and honestly, that was my concern: is there an economic incentive for the manufacturers to move that way? Right? I mean, ultimately, it's probably not a big investment on at least the consumer side or the business side to invest in MUD-enabled products, but is there an economic incentive for that?
Yeah. So again, I think it all kind of cycles back as we move to the pandemic and the teleworking kind of scenario. What has to happen is network security has to be more automatic, right? I mean, you guys are all security experts, so I'm sure you're spending more time in your houses kind of configuring that. But the reality is most people don't know how to do that. And most of the security services and security products that we see don't extend to the home and don't extend to the last segment of the teleworking environment. And now we're seeing a rapid shift of the people that use those networks move to teleworking. And so things that enable security automation are really important in a world where people aren't going in the office to do work.
Yeah, it'd be interesting if we get some of that automation and secure by default into the environment. But I think we're unfortunately still a little far away from that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I can and we haven't done this late, but I could actually share a screen. Can I share a screen? Or is that not consistent with the way this works?
No, I mean you could if you're on the right machine. I don't know which machine Johnny put you on, so we're gonna. Okay, so that? Johnny says you can do it, so go for
it. So this is I'm running the. I'll show you something. This is just I've been just doing this for kind of fun, tinkering in. But if I run network scanning on my laptop, right? So I just scanned, and I'm sitting here, and I've got about 50 devices on my network, and that's all that the network scanner can see, right? And that's not because of firewall. That's because of the virtual networking approach. And so I think that I mean, I've just been playing around with what can I see and what kind of intrusions does that prevent? And it really changes the way we think about networking when things are zero trust and only connect to the things they're supposed to from the start. You know, if you go back to Metcalfe's law, the whole point about these networks was connect everything to everything. And so I think the notion of really inverting that and only connecting things are supposed to be connected to could really change the way we think about cybersecurity. And so that's one of the trends. The thing is, doing that is complicated when you have, you know, tens or hundreds or thousands of devices, and having automation that helps you figure that out down to ports and protocols and what's well-behaving devices. That's where it gets hard. But the good news is that's what machines are good at doing. So I think we're seeing that as an emerging trend, and it's kind of neat to play with it. And being at home lets you play with it now I'm probably playing with it now more than I would have if I was in the office. I would just trust that people were telling me it worked that way, because they don't let me have as much control of my office network as I do of my home network.
You know, I bought a Huawei tablet a couple of years ago, before like even more of the stuff came out about Huawei, and I was just telling one of the other hosts, they're like, what are you going to do with that? I'm like, I'm going to put it on its own network segment, and I'm only going to let it go to sites that are like the ones I use, which is like, you know, Amazon and Netflix, and I use it to like watch TV shows and stuff like that. And I'm not going to let it go anywhere else, except if it needs a software update. I might let it go, you know, pull that down from China, and heavily scrutinize it, and then turn it back off.
Signal when it tries to go somewhere else?
Yeah, I want to get a signal and where it's trying to go and what data it's trying to put there, right?
Right. So that'll be interesting. But yeah, I think that you know, at least for those of us that play around with that stuff in our house, being home gives you more time to do that. And like I said, I wasn't able to do that in my office.
Yeah, Paul's getting a lot more time. Paul's getting extra time too on the technical side, so that's always good for him.
Absolutely.
Drew, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Thanks for having me, guys.
And with that, we'll take a quick break, and then we're going to cover the survey results from the Marketing and Selling to the CISO survey.